Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to be back with you, Nihar. We've had a couple weeks off.
Yeah,
How you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you, Maura. We're up to a nice long weekend coming up. I hope you have nice plans, but it's amazing how fast the summer went by.
Oh my gosh. Yes. It always does. And listeners, if you're out there, please comment and tell us where you're from and throw in your questions. We wanted to do a little bit off the beaten track of our normal conversations here because there's been so much press about Elon Musk recently, and especially the recent article in the New Yorker by Ronan Farrow for me was revelatory, and he's done a lot of ensuing press. I'm a devotee of Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, as I know you are too, and they always have some interesting insight into Elon Musk. But I wanted to look at Musk from the perspective of what he means for leadership. You and I both write about leadership, talk about leadership, work with leaders. What does Elon mean for leaders in this moment and for the rest of us? And then also I have I also my own hi Sunny, Cave Creek, Arizona. Good to see you. I wanted to talk a little bit about Elon's vulnerability as I
Mm.
see it. So, yeah, what's on your mind? Then I have a question for you.
Yeah. Well, the thing that stood out to me a lot in the article and other things that I've been reading about him is how blended the idea of public service and government and business have become now. We first time we had a businessman as a president last term. Now it's a celebrity kind of thing. You can become a president. There was a time, I think, when you would look at the government service as they were elected office, and so therefore you had some kind of a vote in terms of whether you wanted them to be your leader. In business, you can decide to work for somebody like Elon Musk or not by voting with your decision to work, for employment. And yet, in some respects, now Elon Musk has become a leader where, whether you like him or not, he impacts your life in some kind of indirect way with this whole Ronan Farrow article. It's like I might not want to work for a guy like him and join Tesla or SpaceX. Yet, wow, he's impacting the war in Ukraine and all these other things that do impact all of us.
Yes, and
That was
very much
so
the
scary.
infrastructure of our current world and the future world when we all have to live on other planets, like in the movie Interstellar. He's going to
Yeah.
control the pipeline to space.
Right, and all that power in one man's hands is daunting. And I thought about your question around leadership. It's like, on one hand, I think in my world, I oftentimes see that we admire the competency around technical skills, and so we see a lot of, like, a value around super smart engineers and that kind of innovative thinking. But then when we think about moving them towards leading people, that's where I think Elon Musk early on might have had a little bit of that rock star kind of approach. People look up to what he's his visionary thinking and stuff and visionary
Mm.
ability, but the erraticness and the egotism that's behind how he decides to lead, as we've seen with some of his moves in buying Twitter, and as we've seen with how he kind of tries to always kind of insert himself into the story by his own tweets with respect to whether it's
Anything.
Nancy Pelosi's husband or the boys in the cave in Thailand. I mean, it just never ends with him. It's like controversial stuff. And you wonder, if you were a CEO of a company, well, he's a publicly traded CEO, but like most CEOs of publicly traded companies would be thinking a lot more about, wow, how's this going to impact my shareholders and investors?
Inside voice. I think that Elon is actually our most vulnerable and sort of mentally raw CEO, which I think also has tremendous impacts.
Hmm.
Stephen Craig asks, is he spreading himself out too far? We'll get to that in a bit. I think that a lot of the reporting recently has given us insight into how lonely he is, how stressed out he
For
is,
sure.
and and I think it's difficult. So yeah, and Nina from Miami Beach. Hi, Nina. I'm heading to Miami next week. My favorite place. Um, Okay, so I want to ask you a question, which is we think about archetypes of leaders.
Mhm.
How would you describe Elon as a leader? Does he have an archetype that he fits into?
I don't know. I don't think he does. It's so different. The rules have changed a lot, I think, in terms of what success looks like. It's like a lot of times when you look at textbook leadership, the idea of inspiring people and driving business results and the combination of empowering, I think you could argue that just like we see with politics, there's a lot of people that come on the side of saying, "Hey, if it's working, even if it's toxic, so what?" You know? And so I don't even know if the archetype would fit in what we think of traditional leadership theory, or because the results are almost dictated that the ends justify the means, basically.
Yeah. I mean, is he a charismatic kind of traditional totemic leader?
Hmm.
I bet some people would say yes. He's
Yeah.
also sort of in this mad genius theory.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, I don't know if you ever saw him when he hosted Saturday Night Live. It was really interesting to see. He was actually quite, to your point, vulnerable by sharing that he has Asperger's, and he shared a lot about how you would see the human side of him in many ways, and I think that's very powerful. It's a reason why, in fact, there was a lot of news around that week when a lot of the staff was walking out because they were so insulted, offended by the fact that he was chosen as a host. And all things considered, I think he did quite well. But that is the interesting message that a leader like that sends to the world, which is, on one hand, you see some humanity in him because he is flawed, but then you worry about the flaws actually being put in the hands of somebody who has so much power. How's that really going to turn out for the rest of us who are in his orbit, if you will? No pun
Exactly.
intended.
I mean, to me, it's what's so, for someone like me who's always telling leaders, talk about your mental health, talk about your vulnerability, be open. I was thinking about what Elon Musk represents, and for me, I don't agree with him on very much at all right now, but I have a lot of empathy for him,
Mhm.
which I know sounds weird because he's the world's richest man. Like, why would he give a shit if I have empathy for him? But in a way, like, I really do feel that he's open about his mental health, that he
Mhm.
manages depression and takes meds for it, right? He's open about his neurodivergence and that he's on the autism spectrum. He is always showing us his id and his ego and what
Mhm.
he needs. Kara Swisher always says he didn't get hugged enough as a kid. So I think that he's very open about who he is and unapologetic about it, which I love. I think it's great. No, Nina, you did not hear that autism makes him flawed, not at all. And so I think that he's a really interesting kind of leader for those of us who look at this stuff to grapple with, because he's very new. He's the
Yeah.
most powerful CEO probably in the world, the world's richest man, and he is like an open book in a way that, like, your traditional CEO definitely is not.
Yes. The only thing that, not the only thing, but one of the things that does concern me about him as a leader is, when you take on the role of a leader, it's implied that you don't do everything yourself.
Yeah.
And the problem that I see with him is that when he wants to, he just does things himself in a very unilateral way. He did that interview with CNBC where they asked him, "Are you going to tone down your language or your rhetoric because you have shareholders?" He's like, "I don't care if I lose money." But other people are going to lose money as a
Mhm.
result, right? And he can always kind of change who decides to support him. On one hand, he's a big fan of Kanye West, and then the next minute he's a fan of something to help Ukraine. It's like it's very erratic, and it's
Mhm.
and which is fine for somebody who might be suffering from his own demons. But I think the issue is that when you impact other people, it become a little bit of a different game. And what also I find is that there's no real consequences for him because,
Right.
again, he is the richest man in the world. When I'm coaching a lot of executives, it's not enough for me to say, "Hey, let's actually help you with changing behavior." We have to find out what the consequence of not changing it is, or the benefit of changing it is. And I'm not sure that there's a lot of downside for him yet in terms of changing his behavior for the benefit of other people. But I do have empathy for the fact of what he's going through, I think, as an individual.
Yeah. And the fact that a lot of the reporting says that he is very stressed out because he's running too much and he's not sleeping and he feels alone. And I was thinking, I had two thoughts. One is I was reading a profile in New York Magazine of the Goldman Sachs CEO.
Yes, I saw
And
that.
did you read that?
Yes.
And how basically the consensus was what you said that just now, like he's toxic.
Mhm.
Everyone agrees he's toxic. And yet, as long as his balance sheet, as long as he's making money for the Goldman shareholders,
Mhm.
he ain't going anywhere. And but he would face consequences if he started losing Goldman money. Like to me,
Right.
that's a very clear consequence that he would face. He can be a toxic leader who demands that people work nonstop
Mhm.
and be all the things, but if he makes money, he'll leave. But if he doesn't make money, he won't. And Musk doesn't really have that accountability.
Right, right. Also,
Um,
I think with respect to the Goldman Sachs CEO, when he's DJing in the Bahamas and all those things, ultimately he still, I think, plays the circuit of communicating around the media and wants to kind of represent Goldman Sachs's culture in a lot of ways, which does kind of precede him.
yeah.
Whereas, Elon Musk has decided to create the culture of the company around who he is whenever he wants, whenever he decides. If he wants to sleep 2 hours a night, he expects his employees to only sleep 2 hours a night, and it's evolving as it goes along. So I think, a lot of other companies like Goldman Sachs, in some respects, they almost still decide to put a picture forward that, hey, nothing is really changing. We're still good. We're still playing it traditionally. I don't know that Elon Musk actually even cares about playing it traditionally because he's creating his own theme around it.
He clearly doesn't. And so, but that's the other thing. So I was thinking about this too. I mean, I'm curious if I'm curious, if there was a lot of talk when Elon laid off so many people at Twitter and made it lean that a bunch of CEOs turned around and were like, "Oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that."
Mm-hmm.
And um that he very much also brings back this sort of, I'm going to call it Mojo Dojo
Right,
kind
not the house.
of, because I'm going to see Barbie again tonight
Oh,
for the
cool.
fourth time with my daughter. But that this Dojo approach he has, which is so counter to everything we started to talk about during the pandemic, is
Yes.
actually gaining popularity with a lot of CEOs, even though they may not want to talk about it.
Hmm.
Do you see any
I
effects of that?
I can completely agree with you on this because I think in general, even beyond in businesses, I feel like there is a movement. We see so much of this kind of feeling that of let's not get too woke, let's not get too progressive.
Mhm.
This, it's like we went in one direction with George Floyd and the pandemic, and everybody was kind of feeling we're rowing the same boat. And then now there's this reactionary feeling that, well, now everybody's trying to cancel somebody. Everybody's trying to say something that is going to be controversial. And so when you have Elon Musk or other Vivek Ramaswamy, other kind of people who are railing against this kind of culture, but they're also painting it with a broad brush. They're saying that any kind of progressive thinking is trying to silence the voice of the right, for instance. Elon Musk has, I think, moved into that realm. He would say he was a Democrat, he voted Democrat, and all of a sudden now he's going to vote Republican. You have to wonder sometimes if he's doing it just because he also knows that's where the market is going. That's where the public attention is going as well. That's where you get clicks and you get likes and all those kinds of things. I can't really tell sometimes whether it's really an authentic view. I mean, it's authentic to him, but if it's a consistent view or whether it's driven by, again, the ends justifying the means.
That's really interesting. I think we're not used to CEOs wanting to be liked, talked about. I think that, to me, a CEO is a guy who's, or it's usually a guy, so I'm going to say a guy, unfortunately, is layered behind acres and acres of corporate communications and
Yes.
messaging and like, we don't want to do this, but we are going to, don't say that. And
Mhm.
Elon just totally breaks that mold
Yeah.
in so many ways that I do think probably um, a lot of people find it inspiring.
Hmm.
Um, I think the downstream effects, though, we don't even know yet.
Right. There seems to be a fascination with people who can say what they want to say.
Yes.
Whether that, I mean, we can, there's a long list of people like who are doing that now. With the benefit of TikTok and social media, you have these Andrew Tate figures, you have the anti-woke people, right? Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk. They almost get like a pat on the back because, wow, can't believe he said this, and that's amazing and good for them. We should all be able to say what we want, but it's the whole kind of debate about freedom of speech is one thing, but the impact of freedom of speech when it harms people, what do we make of that? And I think he's playing into that zeitgeist now that like, hey, why don't we challenge the boundaries a little bit on this? And he can do that because he really has that ability to, well, I think one is that he has the financial wherewithal, but I also think he has the, to your point, maybe a vulnerability around like a shamelessness about it. Like, hey, I'm flawed and I'm just going to own it.
Yeah.
The
Andrew Tate thing, I have to tell you that my son in middle school was accused of being a simp because he has friends who are girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what's a simp? And it's one of these terms that is basically like you manipulate girls into pretending you're listening and caring about them to get them. And I thought, oh my God, like, I think that there's a lot going on here in terms of masculinity.
Yes.
And men in charge as well. That is like a part of the undercurrent.
I think you're so right. There's a reason why people like Jordan Peterson have become so popular. And Scott Galloway talks a lot about that. How are we raising our young boys to be men, but not in the spirit of misogyny and putting people down and and the frustration, I think, and for a lot of boys and men around, what does it look like to actually have a happy love life going forward, right?
Right.
All these things are kind of wrapped up into it, and it is interesting when you read Elon Musk's story about how many themes are kind of interesting there too. He had an abusive father that he regretted leaving, living with him when he left his mom after they got divorced. The idea that he has been, in the kind of tech bro world, right? So he's kind of seen as a king there, but also that is a little bit of a culture of people who might have been misfits in the traditional way of growing up in Gen X. You know what I mean? So you wonder if they're also kind of making up for lost time of being maybe the people that were bullied in school before. And Elon Musk has said he was bullied a lot too. So all those things are coming into fruition here. Now you wonder if there's a movement now to say, I'm going to reclaim my masculinity, but it's in a very toxic way.
It's a really toxic masculinity. And of course, history is rife with people who've been bullied as children and then grew up to be extremely successful as a kind of vengeance. That's one of our favorite cultural tropes, right? It's Dickensian. But I was wondering, like, if I'm in HR, if I'm a chief human resources officer at a big company right now, and I'm looking ahead and I'm looking at the pandemic numbers and I'm thinking about my company's mental health program and my company's DEI program and all these incredible progressive gains that we've made in the past few years. I think they're amazing because that's where I come from. And then I think, but the world's richest man, the man who is in charge of a lot, is the opposite of everything.
Yes.
That my company has basically evolved to talk about and offer.
Right. And I think he subscribes to that view that what's the point of doing that work? It's pandering, it's creating a replacement theory for those of us who are, the majority are going to be replaced by the minority. That whole Tucker Carlson kind of fear that I think is playing into it as well. And again, I oftentimes think about how much power would an HR executive even have with a CEO like that?
Does he have an HR? I mean, I don't know. Does SpaceX have HR? I guess it does.
No
it's a well-run company with a different CEO. So
right. But you wonder, do they really have a seat at the table at the end of the day if he can do it? He can fire them and get another one whenever he wants, right? That is another thing that's happening, I think, now is people are finding jobs that are expedient as opposed to really investing in a long-term. I had this conversation with I think my wife recently where because I went to college for I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, and my dream back then was to go into the Foreign Service or maybe work in State Department and things like that. And I remember having a moment. This was in 1995, where wow, this is not necessarily smart because all my friends are going to Goldman Sachs and McKinsey and stuff, right? I'm going to be stuck in the bureaucracy, but there was still a nobility in working there. Clinton was the president. There was the West Wing, right? There was a whole kind of like drama around, wow, this is a pageantry, but it was real. That's changed now. We were looking at the Republican debates and we were like, does anybody even care about their position statements? I mean, it's a reality show now. It's kind of like whoever gets more likes and clickbait, right?
The anti-institutionalism, I think, right, is a trend that's been growing for decades now. And actually, one of the points that Ronan Farrow makes in the article that's so fascinating is that, he quotes bureaucrats at NASA saying, things move quickly when we work with SpaceX. Like it's good to work with. It works for us versus having to go through the bureaucracy. And so I think there's definitely a sense of anti-institutionalism in the meaning of Elon Musk because he's taking over systems that were maybe federalized. Now, of course, he's benefited from a ton of federal money as well. Like, let's be honest. But
you just made a great point, by the way, which I do see a lot in my work. When customers benefit from the CEO or the general managers of the product lines and stuff, everything is forgiven. Even if they treat their employees terribly to get the customers happy, to keep them satisfied. And I think that's what's happening a lot of times with even this example, which is, if Elon Musk is able to ship more cars and innovate and get to the Mars and all those kind of things on the shoulders of his employees, he'll just go find more employees. You know what I mean? And it doesn't really matter how he's treating them. That's not really leadership, but it is business savvy if you think about it, right? And so those two things are oftentimes at odds.
What's the difference between leadership and business savvy?
Business savvy is about really kind of the numbers, are you hitting the results or not, and meeting expectations of the people that are paying you. Whereas if you're, there's a social contract with employees that does not necessarily mean that I'm paying you for what you're going to give me. I mean, I'm giving you a salary and all that, but I can't demand discretionary effort from you. This is why leadership is so much more about influencing and inspiring and empowering. And when you have the capital to not have to do that, to not have to rely on your people to get to where you need to go, why bother? That's what I feel is happening with some of these oligarchic kind of leaders.
Right. And when you don't have shareholders or any of that kind of infrastructure, I guess, meant to
like he gets money from the public markets, but I think and let's take it back even to his own values. I remember seeing an interview where he talked about how even when he had money after PayPal, he still chose to eat $4 worth of food a day. Yeah. It's the mindset of the money's not the reason why he's doing this.
No,
but the money does enable him to not have to care about other people. So he'll take the shareholder money to create more of a following, but he can also make the investment very risky for people who are going to invest in him.
Do you think that, do you think we're going to see a change in 5 years in the culture of leadership because of the influence of Elon Musk, or he's just going to maintain this kind of Elon show kind of outside phenomenon and things will keep evolving?
I think we're already seeing a little bit of the shift. I actually believe it started with, like you said, anti-institutional thinking. Trump, I think, disrupted a little bit of what we thought about as leadership. And what I think is happening, I think we'll always have a sense for that we want to work for leaders who are a little bit more healthy, and less toxic. But I also think that toxic leaders enable us to kind of run away from the hard stuff, and still feel as if we can, take the shortcut to things. And as the next generations grow up and they start creating startups and building companies, they can choose to build those companies the way they want to. And again, they can potentially live a life where the ends justify the means as well. I mean, perfect example is Mark Zuckerberg. So here's a guy who was super, admired when he built Facebook, right? But then, as he got successful, has now created a lot of fear, not fear, but a lot of skepticism about whether he really is doing what's best for the world. Now, you could argue that he has, without Facebook, where would we be, right? He's definitely evolved the world for us. But at the same time, too much control in one person's hands. And particularly somebody like that who is not sharing the wealth with, sharing the checks and balances with his board. He still has the majority.
Right. I mean, some would say that Zuckerberg, although the opposite of Musk in every other way, right? He's rigidly controlled. He's never says anything. He is just the picture. And, apparently like a good, lovely family man and like very progressive values, right? He funds an education nonprofit, has had a more insidious effect. And I actually think Facebook is the most insidious thing, than Musk. And he just does it in a way that is more socially acceptable. He's a socially acceptable behaving CEO in many ways.
That's exactly right.
But is he any less toxic?
No. And it's interesting. It makes you think whether Elon Musk, in deciding to buy Twitter, realized that, wow, that's where I want to start moving. Because remember, before that, he was actually building things. That was, I think, why we thought of him as somebody who was really inspiring.
He's still building things, though. He's still got all those other companies.
No, exactly. But that was the thing. He was actually becoming successful because he built things. Now he's becoming an arbiter of speech, and in kind of like dipping his feet in the media world, like Facebook was. And you can see a little bit of that now, that healthy rivalry, the fact that they challenge each other to a jiu-jitsu match. And I mean, the whole thing is kind of bizarre, right? But you do get a sense that Elon Musk realized perhaps that there's value in being at the front of the conversation than just in the back in a factory building things, even though that was probably adding more value for the world.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. When you just talked about the cage match, it makes me feel like I'm living in some kind of alternate reality where like many companies are just like, we hear from people over and over again. They want like competent leadership. They want leadership who is open. They want leadership who feel like grown-ups, but are also vulnerable in appropriate ways. They want all the things, all the, wonderful equity moves. And yet you have on the side here, this absolute flouting of all of those norms, very Trumpian, that seems to be gaining power, not losing it. And so it's like you're just looking at two worlds.
Right.
For me, just observing it and thinking, well, wait a minute, like what's happening?
Right.
Who's going to win?
Yeah. Yeah. And it again, it plays to some segments of the population, I think, look up to that, look up to that flouting of the rules. And
clearly they do.
And, wow, they're so rich. And like, what would it be like to be that rich, even if it means, sacrificing certain values that are productive.
Yeah.
So that, and I don't know that that's ever going to go away, because until it really hurts you, being an observer and a spectator, it's kind of fun. It's like watching the car accident, like you can't stop watching it. Who couldn't stop watching Trump's crazy tweets every day the past,
I could. President. I was done. Yeah. No.
I mean, yeah. But I'll tell you what media channel could ever stop giving into that. No. And Jeff Zucker had the whole watch the empty podium, and CNN's ratings went up. That is another problem too. I think the media really plays into this because they love the controversy.
Yeah.
So how do we even get away from that toxicity when there's dollar bills from the ad revenue to highlight it?
Right. And I guess he clearly drives eyeballs and clicks because the media coverage of him is incessant.
Exactly.
And, and has that sort of like circus Trump sense. Well, we're almost at time. We're not going to solve anything. I find myself reading and listening and learning all about Musk too. I'm fascinated by him.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting. Well, certainly it's interesting to see where he just decides to get involved, because he pretty much tries to get involved in anything. But, when we think about starting to have a perspective on lawmaking and things that policy making and stuff, that's when I think it's going to be a little bit worrisome because again, you can choose to not be an employee of his, but if you're a citizen who's being impacted, and again, he's not elected, right?
Nope.
That's the other thing too. So we didn't have a say on whether he was going to run the satellites in Ukraine, but and to the other point that I think Ronan Farrow talks about is, on one hand, you're grateful that he did that.
Yep.
So is he also quite smart to say, let me help people and then let me, control them, and then I can take it away when I want to?
Right. I mean, at a time when NASA is shrinking,
Right.
it's very American that we have plutocrats going to space, right?
Yep.
It is very American.
Yeah. Wow.
Well,
We'll have to see.
thanks for spending the time, and listeners, if you have thoughts, we'd love to hear. We'll be back in a couple weeks.
All right. Great to see you, Maura.